Welcome to the Living the Dream podcast with Curveball. If you believe, you can achieve. Welcome to the Living the Dream with Curveball podcast, a show where I interview guests that teach, motivate, and inspire. Today, we're going to be talking creativity as I am joined by Angie Dixon. She is a multi-passionate author, summit host, artist, and neurospicy human being. She's been doing her thing for 2 decades. So we're going to be talking to her about what she's up to and going to be up to and why she does what she does. So Angie, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join me.
Thank you for having me, Curtis. I'm excited to be here.
Why don't you start off by telling everybody a little bit about yourself?
Okay, I'm neurodivergent. I have autism and ADHD, which we call ADHD. I'm the author of the book, The Leonardo Trait, which is coming out January 27th. This is actually the 4th edition of this book, and the subtitle of this edition is Profound Creativity in a Chaotic World. It's about, obviously, profound creativity. I wrote the first 3 editions before I realized that I was neurodivergent. So this book is really about neurodivergent creativity and unmasking and being just more of who you are. I really think that neurodivergent people will get the most out of it, but anyone who's really creative and a little different and kind of marches to a different drumbeat will probably enjoy the book, and I'm really excited to talk about it.
Yeah, well, let's talk about you also are a summit host. So explain to listeners what that is.
Okay, well, normally a virtual summit is you have a bunch of people who get on Zoom or some YouTube or some platform and give recorded presentations. For various reasons, I am not able to do that kind of a virtual summit. I'm disabled. It's hard for me to do the planning and the work for that. And I decided to host an email-based summit, which is exactly what it sounds like. My speakers, instead of speaking, are going to write a presentation, and those will go out by email throughout the days of the summit, 3 or 4 a day each day. And that's also on January 27th. And I'm really excited about this because it's accessible to everyone, not just accessible for me to do it, but also accessible for neurodivergent people who might have trouble with showing up at a specific time. They might be busy. They might just not have the spoons that day, the energy. Um, and my speakers are really excited about it. They think it's going to be really great. And I'm just really looking forward to holding that.
Well, you coined the phrase Leonardo trait. So explain to the listeners what that is and how someone will know if they have the Leonardo trait.
Well, the Leonardo trait is something I came up with just on the spur of the moment one night. I was talking with my best friend and her daughter about some books I've been reading about creativity, and one author had coined the term Benjamin Franklin's, and she was talking about creative people, but she didn't really seem to get the kind of creativity that I have, of the constantly switching projects, but coming back to them and having, you know, 37 tabs open in your brain at one time. And the other author seemed to get it a little bit more, but she recommended that you have a file cabinet for each project that you have. And I would need like a 5-story house to have a file cabinet for each project I have going on. And I was telling my friend about this and her daughter, and the daughter said, well, what would you call people? What do you think it is? And I said, well, it's a trait. I like to think of it as being like Leonardo, who did so many different things and was accepted for doing so many different things, and we celebrate him. And my friend said, "So the Leonardo trait." And I said, "Yeah, that's what I call it." And she said, "You know, you have to write that book now." And so I did. I started the next day. That was in 2006. And like I said, I'm just putting out the fourth edition of the book. And really, people who constantly have new ideas coming up, who think that they're maybe a little too much because they're of their creativity, who think they're weird, who think that people are overwhelmed by them, people who spiral in and out of projects. You have something going on and you're really into it and you're doing a lot with it, and then you set it aside and you take on another project for a while, and then you come back to the original one, and then you go off to a third one and you come back to the second one. Those are the people really who have the Leonardo trait, and it's just a way of expressing creativity and a real, I want to say, a plentiness of creativity, a lot of creativity.
Well, let's talk about autistic masking. Talk about what that is and how it shaped your life and what finally pushed you to unmask.
Right. Masking in autism, we talk about masking, and what we mean is trying to appear to be neurotypical because autistic people are not like neurotypical people. We don't do the same things in the same way. One thing is that, like I said, we have a lot of interests. We get really excited about our interests. We veer off and do a lot of different things. We get obsessed with something and talk about it all the time. We call that a special interest that we're just really obsessed with and want to talk about to the point that other people may think that that's a little too much. People often use the words too much or a lot about us, especially in a professional setting. We tend to find people who love us for who we are, but a lot of times we also try to hide some of who we are. And I think that we do that especially when we don't know that we're autistic, or when we've not accepted that who we are is not too much. We're not broken. We're brilliant and we're perfectly enough. And for me, masking was, I was a weird kid. I mean, I have been weird or different all my life. And I tried really hard to fit in. I got a degree. I worked in an office for many years, and I just never really felt like I was being myself or like I could be myself. And as I was writing the Leonardo trait, the first one, I started talking about being who we are, being more of who we are. And I started to unmask a bit. And a few years ago, I was actually diagnosed with autism. And I realized that this is not me being weird. This is not me just not being the right kind of person or not having the right kind of ambition or drive. That autism is who I am, and that my brain just functions differently. And I was talking recently to someone who said that she has an autistic friend and she thinks of it as her friend's superpower. And I said, absolutely. But it's hard at first for us to recognize that this is great. Who we are is amazing. And I think it's really important to have somebody in your life or whom you've heard of, or you've read a book, or you've heard this podcast. And I just want to say to people that you are brilliant and enough, and this is your superpower, being who you are. There's not another one of you in the world. And to me, that is so important to realize, that that you're special. I mean, I think everyone is special in their own way, but I like to think that autistic people don't recognize their specialness, but they are extraordinarily special.
Well, let's talk about autistic burnout. What does autistic burnout look like in adults, and why is autistic burnout so misunderstood?
It's really easy for autistic people to burn out, partly because of the masking and partly because we're not equipped mentally or emotionally to do the hustle lifestyle and the working constantly and trying to meet other people's expectations of us. And when we burn out, it's often after a long time of pushing way too hard, pushing our bodies and our brains way too far. And it looks like depression in a lot of people. It looks like it can look like apathy. It can look like, working for 2 weeks straight with no break and then going to bed for a month or, a lesser or a longer period of time. And it's really, I'm in a couple of neurodivergent groups and I'm learning more and more about burnout from other people. My burnout story was that I did not realize how burned out I was until I became disabled and was no longer able to work. And at first, it was really shocking to me to not be able to work because I had worked so much and made work such a big part of my life. And for 2 or 3 years, I was not able to work at all. And after the first few months, I began to realize that this is actually really good. I needed some time off. And after, like I said, after a few years, I became able to work somewhat again. And I realized that my relationship with work had changed because I had wrested my way out of what had turned out to be really severe autistic burnout. And I was suddenly, I had more energy, had more time. I was able to choose more carefully what I wanted to do with my time. And I realize that not everyone is going to have that opportunity. I like to say that becoming disabled was one of the best things that happened to me because it broke me out of my autistic workaholism and burnout. But I think that everyone who is in burnout can hopefully find a way to sort of start to back off from some of that. And I hope that I'm giving them permission to do that.
Let's take a quick break.
Okay, everybody, it's Michael E. Cullen II.
And I'm Sesame and Carta from the All Too Real 2 podcast. We're passionate about movies, TV, and pretty much all things pop culture.
Dive into the chaos of failed sitcoms, direct-to-video sequels, and the quirky realms of cinema and TV.
Join us every Thursday for your dose of All Too Real 2 entertainment.
We'll guide you through debates like whether Howard the Duck qualifies as a superhero.
Ponder if Larry the Cable Guy could be the new Rock or Schwarzenegger.
Discover if some shows and movies should have stayed in the cutting room.
Ever heard of a sitcom featuring that dictator with the funny mustache? Well, we watched it.
We're dedicated to unraveling the peculiarities of pop culture, sometimes with awesome guests.
So, if you're into the eccentric world of pop culture,
listen and subscribe to All Too Real 2.
Available wherever you find podcasts
and on Age of Radio.
Well, let's talk about why multi-passionate creatives struggle with traditional productivity.
There's a couple reasons. The first reason is that we're not really good at working in a linear fashion. We have multiple things going on in our brains and in our lives at once. Like I said, I'm juggling getting a book out and getting the summit ready, and I wouldn't have that any other way. But very often in traditional offices, traditional business jobs, they expect you to do one thing and finish it and then do the next thing and finish it. I mean, you may be working on multiple things at once, but they want you to kind of work on them simultaneously, and we don't do that very well. We really hyper focus on one thing and then switch over to the next thing and hyper focus on that for a while. And we don't really fit into the traditional mold of productivity. And the other, I said there were a couple things. The other thing is that I think the hyper focus really sometimes we get hyper focused on something that other people don't see the importance of. And it is important. It's important, and we know where we're going with it. But quite often, other people look at us and they think we're off working over here on the side on something, when really what we're doing is doing something that's going to make the whole thing come together in the end in a brilliant way, but it's not obvious to them what we're doing. And actually there's a third thing is that hustle culture is just really hard on us for the reasons I mentioned earlier about burnout. So the more we hustle, the harder our lives become.
Speaking of that, give people out there that might be neurodivergent best practice tips on building a life or business that fits their brain instead of, fighting against it.
Absolutely. One thing is if you are working for someone else is to, I think, be open about what you need and keep looking until you find something that works for you. I'm not going to say that everyone who's neurodivergent needs to work for themselves. I think you should do what you're drawn to, whether that's being a doctor or an accountant or a writer like myself. But I think that it's possible if you know what you need and you know what you want to do, it is very possible to work within the system and still be yourself. And I think unmasking and being your authentic self is a very big part of that. If you are working for yourself, it's very easy if you're running your own business to get caught up in this. I need to do what everyone else is doing. And it's just you don't. You don't have to do what everyone is doing. You don't have to fit in. The more you don't fit in, the more you're going to succeed. When I came up with the idea for holding an email summit, which no one has ever done, it was an idea that I came up with. And I thought, no one is going to be interested in this. No one is going to want to speak at it. No one is going to want to come to it. And the response has just been off the charts. Within a day I had 20 people asking to speak and I had 12 slots. So I expanded the summit. I think it's a leap of faith. You have to believe that being yourself is going to work, and it is going to work. I think that's the biggest thing, is to just understand that being yourself is absolutely the right thing.
Well, let's talk about your late autism diagnosis. What, how has your life changed after getting that late diagnosis, and what made you decide to even go in and get checked, or feel like, hey, I need to go get this checked out?
Well, my son was diagnosed at, I think, 23 with autism, and it still took me several years to get a clue about that, which is funny because we basically share a brain. We are the same person. But after he was diagnosed, I had several people on on Facebook, and once when I was in the hospital, asked me if I was autistic, and I said, I might be. I might be. And I finally reached a point where I thought, I want to know. mean, some people choose not to get a diagnosis for various reasons. They can't afford it, or they just don't want a diagnosis, or they're nervous about having it on their medical record for various reasons. I decided I wanted to know, and that diagnosis really changed everything for me. It realigned me with who I really am. It helped me understand what I was actually writing about in the Leonardo trait, and it actually changed how I see myself. I still had a tendency to see myself as different and not really understand why. Once I realized that I am autistic, it opened up so many channels. I started seeking out neurodivergent spaces and neurodivergent people. And it was the first time in my life that I really felt like I had people in a community and that people were going to understand me when I said things related to my life. That if I had a special interest or if something was more clear to me because of my neurodivergence, that there would be people who would understand that.
Well, let's talk about this. How can someone unmask safely without wrecking their whole life?
Okay, that's a good one. I think, it goes in steps. You start unmasking with people you feel safe around. You start maybe sort of taking small steps at work and around the people that you care about. Um, I don't think you should go into work and announce that you are not ever going to work in a straight line again. But I think that you can go into work and say, hey, I've noticed that I work better when I spend a block of time on this and then a block of time on that, and that moving between them in short bursts kind of drains my energy as I move. I think that you can talk to the people around you and explain, I think I'm autistic or I know I'm autistic, and I would like to try some of these things with working a little differently. I'd like to be a little more of who I am. I'd like to have a little freedom to experiment with trying some new ways of working, which might involve, like I said, spending more time in larger blocks, maybe having more communication be by email instead of so many phone calls or meetings, or perhaps having people understand that if you are meeting in person or if you are meeting on the phone, that you may need to write down what is said and then come back with more questions than you might previously have. That you may need a little time to absorb what's going on. Another thing is that autistic people are very literal. We take things very literally and we need things explained very clearly to us. Not like we're not smart, but like we don't always pick up on social cues. And you might say, it'd be great if you do a little more of X. And what we hear is that you think that would be great, not that you need us to do more of X and less of Y. We really need clear communication.
Well, to the creatives out there that might feel burnout or overwhelmed and they feel like they've tried everything, what's the one piece of advice you would give them?
I think the biggest thing you can do is to give yourself some forgiveness and some peace and understand that you may be overwhelmed, but you are going to be okay. And to try to get as much rest and as much space as you can, and try to surround yourself with people who are going to help you heal from your burnout and your overwhelm.
Tell us about any upcoming projects that you're working on that listeners need to be aware of.
So I have my book coming out and I have my summit coming out both on January 27th. And you can find out more about those at profoundcreativity.com.
That was my next question, your website. So close us out with some final thoughts. Maybe if there was something I forgot to talk about that you would like to touch on, or any final thoughts you have for the listeners.
I just want to say that I think that all of your listeners are brilliant and special, whether they're neurodivergent or not. But if they are neurodivergent, I hope that I've said something that really encourages them to be who they are authentically.
Go at your website one more time.
profoundcreativity.com.
There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Please check out profoundcreativity.com. Check out Angie's Summits. Pick up the book when it comes out, January 27, 2026. Follow, rate, review, share this episode to as many people as possible. For more information on the Living the Dream with Curveball podcast, visit www.curveball337.com and share the site and the show to as many people that you know. Thank you for listening and supporting the show. And Angie, thank you for all that you do, and thank you for joining me.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
For more information on the Living the Dream with Curveball podcast, visit www.curveball337.com. Until next time, keep living the dream.